Good morning, Nigerian 2120.
Cleared for takeoff, 3-4 left.
What's that?
A mysterious sound.
The air brake thing just broke.
Smoke.
I'll take a look.
You've lost all hydraulics.
A confounding series of failures.
We're declaring an emergency.
We are having flight control problems.
Roger, I thought you were...
Saudi 7380s.
There's smoke in the back, real bad.
A raging inferno.
Bodies were falling out of the aircraft.
There it is, 2 miles out! Christ, I have no control!
261 people
Landing gear down!
on the brink of disaster.
In the world of aviation, safety is always the top priority. But sometimes, despite the best efforts, tragic events occur. One such event happened on July 11, 1991, when a Douglas DC-8, operated by Nationair Canada for Nigeria Airways, was engulfed in flames mid-flight. This wasn't just any routine flight. It was carrying pilgrims traveling from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, to Kozhikode, Nigeria. What led to this devastating accident? How did something as simple as underinflated tires cause a massive disaster? And what lessons were learned from this tragedy? Let's dive into the details of this catastrophic event and the aftermath. The tragic incident occurred aboard a Douglas DC-861, a wide-body jet known for its reliability in both commercial and charter flights. This specific flight, Nigeria Airways Flight 2120, was a chartered service carrying 261 people, including 247 passengers and 14 crew members. It was supposed to be a routine flight, transporting pilgrims from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, to Sokoto, Nigeria. The aircraft took off from King Abdulaziz International Airport in Jeddah, a busy hub for international travel, with no signs of trouble at the outset. The crew had completed all pre-flight checks, and everything appeared normal. The plane was fueled, the systems were in good working order, and the flight plan was clear. There was no indication of any immediate mechanical issues. The aircraft descended smoothly, climbing into the skies as planned. But as the plane gained altitude, something went wrong. What the crew didn't realize at the time was that a problem, which seemed small, was brewing. The aircraft had been carrying a heavy load due to the large number of passengers and cargo. Despite the routine checks, the main landing gear tires had been underinflated. While this may not seem like a big deal, tires that aren't inflated properly can be dangerous, especially when they heat up. As the plane accelerated on takeoff, the heat generated by the friction on the runway led to one of the underinflated tires bursting. The result was a catastrophic chain of events that would soon spiral out of control. The initial issue that set off the disaster was an underinflated tire. In any airplane, the condition of the tires is crucial, especially when the plane is under the stress of takeoff. Underinflated tires create extra friction as they rotate, which can lead to excessive heat buildup. When one of these tires burst shortly after takeoff, it didn't just cause a small issue. It ignited sparks and friction, triggering a fire in the landing gear compartment. Tires, when properly inflated, can handle the stress of takeoff without causing trouble. But underinflated tires don't perform as well and can overheat more easily. Once the tire burst, the sparks from the impact caught the highly flammable materials in the landing gear compartment, including hydraulic lines, fuel lines, and insulation. This sparked a fire that began to spread through the belly of the aircraft. It wasn't just the fire in the landing gear that posed a problem, but the speed at which it spread. The fire quickly extended into other vital areas of the aircraft. Hydraulic lines, essential for the control systems of the aircraft, were damaged by the fire. When the hydraulic fluid ignited, it made the fire more intense and harder to contain. By the time the crew realized what was happening, the fire was well beyond their ability to control it. This was no longer a small problem. The aircraft was quickly becoming uncontrollable, and the crew was facing an emergency situation far worse than expected. At this stage, the pilots made the decision to return to King Abdulaziz International Airport for an emergency landing. They had to turn the plane around and try to land as quickly as possible. But by the time they fully understood the scale of the fire, it was already too late. The fire had reached critical components, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. This is a tragic example of how small issues, like underinflated tires, can snowball into far larger and more dangerous problems. As the fire spread through the aircraft, the crew realized the severity of the situation. Initially, they had no idea just how quickly the fire was consuming the plane's interior. The landing gear fire escalated, and the flames spread from the belly of the aircraft into the upper portions of the plane. The fire wasn't contained in one area, but was now affecting critical systems throughout the aircraft. The fire moved quickly due to the presence of flammable materials, such as insulation and hydraulic lines. When hydraulic lines ruptured, the flammable hydraulic fluid sprayed across the fire, fueling it further and making it more difficult to control. Hydraulic fluid is highly flammable, and when ignited, it increases the intensity of a fire, making it far more dangerous. As a result, the aircraft's control systems, which relied on hydraulic fluid, began to fail. Despite the crew's best efforts to return to the airport, the situation was rapidly becoming out of control. The fire had damaged essential components of the aircraft, including parts of the control system that pilots rely on to steer and manage the aircraft. The situation became even more urgent when the cabin crew reported thick smoke filling the cabin. The fire had spread into areas that affected the aircraft's pressurization systems, causing the plane to lose cabin pressure rapidly. The loss of pressurization meant that passengers and crew were now breathing smoke-filled air, which would lead to incapacitation for many people on board. Smoke inhalation becomes extremely dangerous in such a confined space, and it is a major factor in many fatalities during in-flight accidents. In addition to the fire itself, the loss of pressurization created an even more hazardous environment for the crew and passengers. As the fire caused more damage to the aircraft, the situation went from bad to worse. The plane's control systems were compromised. Hydraulic fluid, which controls the movement of the aircraft's wings and other essential parts, was now leaking and burning. With hydraulic systems disabled, the pilots had less and less ability to control the direction and stability of the aircraft. This left the crew with fewer options as they attempted to return to the airport for a safe landing. The fire also affected the electrical systems. With both electrical and hydraulic systems compromised, the plane's ability to fly safely was significantly reduced. As the fire continued to rage, the crew had to fight to maintain control of the aircraft, knowing that any wrong move could lead to a crash. In addition to the mechanical issues, the fire caused a dramatic loss of cabin pressurization. The rapid loss of cabin pressure meant that oxygen levels dropped quickly. As the smoke filled the cabin, many passengers were rendered unconscious due to smoke inhalation. The plane was now losing altitude, and the chances of a successful emergency landing were slipping away fast. Passengers likely experienced intense panic as the fire spread and smoke filled the cabin. The crew's training and the plane's emergency systems were the last line of defense. But with so many critical systems already damaged, it became a race against time. The crew, under immense pressure, had to make difficult decisions, but the severity of the fire and the loss of control made it nearly impossible to recover from the situation. Tragically, the aircraft was unable to make it back to the airport, and the attempt at an emergency landing ended in disaster. The crew did their best to return to King Abdulaziz International Airport to make an emergency landing. However, the fire had become so intense by this point that the plane couldn't make it. As they tried to land, the plane lost control and crashed. Tragically, all 261 people aboard, including 247 passengers and 14 crew members, perished in the disaster. The plane was consumed by fire and crashed while attempting an emergency landing. As a result, no first-hand accounts from passengers or survivors exist, making this incident even more somber. However, interviews with investigators and officers who worked on the scene of the crash provide some insight into the events that transpired. The investigators, including those from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, were able to reconstruct the sequence of events based on the wreckage, black box data, and the accounts of the ground crew and air traffic controllers. In interviews, they expressed their shock at how quickly the situation deteriorated, pointing to the underinflated tires as the root cause of the fire. They were especially concerned with the lack of effective fire detection systems in the wheel well area, which allowed the fire to spread undetected for a critical period. Air traffic controllers who were involved in the emergency response also provided details about the crew's efforts to return to the airport. According to their accounts, the crew seemed to be in control initially, requesting permission to return to Jeddah. However, as the fire worsened, the crew began to sound more urgent. The air traffic controllers described the communication as increasingly desperate as the aircraft struggled to maintain altitude and control. Some officers noted how difficult it was to coordinate with the crew as the situation became more chaotic. The radio communications painted a picture of a crew under extreme pressure, trying everything they could to save the aircraft despite rapidly losing control. The officers and experts involved in the investigation also discussed how such an accident could have been prevented with proper maintenance and better safety procedures. In interviews, they mentioned the importance of regular tire checks and the need for better oversight of the airline's maintenance protocols. They also pointed out that had the fire detection systems been more advanced or in place, it might have provided the crew with the warning they needed to act sooner. In the aftermath of the investigation, safety improvements and recommendations were made, hoping that lessons from this tragedy would influence future aviation safety standards. While there were no survivors to recount their experiences, the interviews with investigators, air traffic controllers, and safety officers revealed the critical factors that led to the disaster. Their insights helped shape changes in aviation safety regulations, ensuring that future flights would be better equipped to handle similar emergencies. After the crash of Nigeria Airways Flight 2120, the investigation revealed several critical factors that led to the disaster. The most significant issue was the underinflated tires on the aircraft's main landing gear. These tires had not been properly maintained, and their underinflation caused them to overheat during takeoff, ultimately leading to a burst tire that ignited a fire in the landing gear compartment. Had the tires been correctly inflated and regularly checked, this issue might have been avoided, preventing the fire from starting. Another major problem was the lack of effective fire detection and suppression systems in the landing gear area. The fire began in the wheel well, but the aircraft was not equipped with adequate sensors to detect the blaze early. Without early detection, the fire spread uncontrollably, damaging critical systems and making it harder for the crew to manage the emergency. The fire suppression systems also failed to contain the fire, allowing it to escalate rapidly and eventually compromise the aircraft's control systems. The investigation also highlighted insufficient crew training and communication issues. The flight crew was not adequately trained to handle a fire originating in the landing gear, and they struggled to assess the situation in time. Additionally, communication between the crew and air traffic controllers was hindered by the aircraft's rapidly deteriorating condition, which led to delays in decision-making and coordinated emergency responses. Furthermore, the airline's lax maintenance practices and lack of proper oversight contributed to the failure of the tires and the disaster. These findings led to changes in aviation safety standards to prevent similar tragedies in the future. This tragic incident showed the importance of proper aircraft maintenance. Regular tire checks and ensuring that all systems are functioning as they should are crucial for safe flying. Had the tires been properly inflated, this fire may have never started. The investigation also pointed out the need for better fire detection and suppression systems, particularly in high-risk areas like the landing gear. In this case, the fire spread unchecked, making the situation far worse than it could have been. The crew's performance during the emergency also highlighted areas where improvements were needed. The lack of training in handling tire failure and fire-related emergencies left the crew with limited options when things went wrong. Improved emergency training and procedures could have made a difference in how the crew responded to the fire. One of the biggest takeaways from this tragedy is the importance of proper maintenance. Airlines need to ensure that they regularly check the condition of their planes, including tires and fire detection systems. Unfortunately, in this case, maintenance practices were not up to par, which led to a disaster that could have been avoided. But it's not just up to airlines. Regulatory bodies also have a responsibility to ensure that airlines are following strict safety protocols. In this case, oversight seemed to be lacking, which allowed these maintenance issues to go unnoticed. The crew of Nigeria Airways Flight 2120 was faced with an incredibly challenging situation. The fire spread quickly, and their ability to control the aircraft was severely limited by the loss of hydraulic and electrical systems. But beyond the technical challenges, the crew's training played a role in the outcome. In emergency situations like this, it's not just about knowing what buttons to press. It's about being prepared for the worst and having the right training to deal with the unexpected. Unfortunately, the crew's training was not enough to deal with this unique and rapidly escalating emergency. The tragic crash of Nigeria Airways Flight 2120 serves as a painful reminder of the risks involved in air travel. While flying is one of the safest modes of transportation, accidents can still happen if safety procedures, maintenance practices, and crew training are not up to the required standards. The loss of 261 lives in this disaster is a tragedy that should never be forgotten. The investigation into the incident revealed critical safety issues that, if addressed, could prevent similar accidents from happening in the future. Airlines and regulatory bodies must always put safety first, and they must never become complacent when it comes to maintenance and training. This incident is a stark reminder that even small issues, like underinflated tires, can snowball into something much larger and more dangerous. The lessons learned from this disaster have since influenced safety changes in aviation, and we can only hope that the memory of this tragic accident continues to drive improvements in the industry. What do you think could have been done differently to prevent this? Could better technology have helped in detecting the fire earlier, or was it just a case of too many factors going wrong at once? That's it for now. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel.